everyone, this is your Tuesday's topic lesson and we are going to look at how friction affected the ancient Egyptians. The first thing I want you to do before we actually get into friction in the ancient Egyptians is think about what friction is. So that means going on to these two links, which will also be linked into Dojo, and having a look at what we mean by the word friction. So there's also some BBC Bitesize and there's a YouTube video which is an easy, compact way of realising what friction is. You have touched on it in year 4, so what I want you to do as you're watching these short videos is just make some notes on your whiteboard or on your book or whatever you've got in front of you and make some notes about what friction is. So from watching the videos, now we can actually look at the definition of friction. And friction is a force between two surfaces that are sliding or trying to slide across each other. So example, when you push a book alongside a floor, friction makes it difficult. It doesn't just slide across, you actually have to push it. And friction works on the direction opposite. And this means the object is moving or at least trying to move. So when we put friction with the ancient Egyptians, it's usually something that you don't put together. However, ancient Egyptians were really clever and they thought of how to reduce friction to help them get the pyramid blocks up and many miles away and up to where the Giza and the Valley of the Kings were. So when ancient Egyptians were building the pyramids, they didn't have anything like cranes or trucks to move these massive bricks for them. And wheels weren't invented then, so they couldn't put them on wheels and just roll them across. They had to think of something to move these heavy stones. And they had to move them without any technology. So as you can see in the picture, we used people. When you drag something over the ground, like in the picture, there's a force between the surfaces. So between the ground and the brick, there is a force, and that is friction. And that makes it really difficult to pull or push that alongside each other. So for example, when you try and push a chair along the carpet, it doesn't just glide across the carpet, does it? It has to be pushed. You have to put that push into motion. You have to be the force to push it across the floor. It's not just going to glide itself. And that is friction. Friction is always works with the direction opposite. So friction slows down a moving object. So for example, like the chair that we used before, if you're pushing it, it's not going to be really quickly. It's slowing it down. It's jolting it, which means you have to put the force into the chair. The amount of friction depends on the materials from which the two surfaces are made. So the rougher the surface, like carpet or sandpaper, the more friction it's going to produce. And the lesser the surface, the less rough the surface, like snow or water or ice, the less friction it's going to be. Friction also produces heat. So if you put your two surfaces together, which are your hands, they're quite smooth, however they will produce friction. So if you rub them together really, really quickly, it also produces heat. And you will feel your hands get warmer. So let's think about your body, something that you might know. If you kind of slide your body too quickly on a rough surface, like carpet, the friction is too strong. And that means that heat is also produced. And that's why you get a carpet burn. So your skin starts to graze because the friction has took that top layer of your skin off. And that's why we call it a carpet burn. On your page or your whiteboard now, can you think of any other types of friction burns, or can you any type of any friction on surfaces that you can think of? So using and reducing friction. So friction is really useful in some ways. It helps people grip to the floor, so your tyres, so it means you're not skidding. You have mountain shoes or hiking shoes which have grip on them to make you stop your skidding or stop moving. And there's also people who don't want friction. So like ice skaters, the ice skaters' boots are really sharp. So that means that they cut through the ice and they don't have any friction, so they can move and glide really quickly. Friction can be reduced by using methods like lubrication. So it means if we add something to that surface, it means the friction won't be as much, so our object can glide easier. For example, when we've got a door hinge, it is quite stiff to move and it's got a friction between the hinge and the bolt it's rubbing together. But if we had a liquid like oil, that then reduces the friction and it helps it move easy. So you're not having that horrible noise when you open the door every time because it's not rubbing on each other because the oil has made it wetter. So when we go back to our Egyptians, they understood that the rougher surface meant the greater amount of friction, and they had a rough surface. They were using sand. So they also knew the greater the friction, the more force it was needed. So to move one of those massive bricks up the pyramid, they needed a lot of men. But they worked out to move a heavy stone across a rough surface, like we talked about sand, they would need lots of men or slaves to do it. And they wanted an easier and quicker option. This worked for a while, but obviously they were very clever. They wanted to do it quickly. So they worked out that they could build the pyramids faster if they could move the stones with less men, therefore making other men go and build something else. So they had 2 lots of men instead of just 1 lot of men moving stones. They understood that friction can be used in methods like lubrication. So they thought, how can they make this surface have less friction? We knew that they were thinking about that by looking at the hieroglyphs and the paintings that they found in the workers' caves. So here we have the actual image of the ancient Egyptians, and they worked by pouring the water onto the sand. This lubricated the surface and reduced the friction, so it made the sand a lot softer and a lot easier to glide the sledge across. This meant it was easier and less force was needed, so they meant they didn't need as many men to pull the weight. So here you can see the image of the statue, which is obviously really, really heavy, sometimes made out of solid gold, the sledge, and the man and the worker who is on the sledge pouring the water onto the sand, therefore making it really easy to slide across, lessening the friction. So let's think about a way in which you can relate to it. So when you're in a sledge and someone's pulling you along when it's snowed, the snow acts as a lubricant, making it easier for you to be pulled across the floor on your sledge. Let's think if the snow is all melted and it's just grass and gravel and you're wanting to be pulled on a sledge, is it harder or easier for that person to pull you? Have a think now. And you should have said it is much harder because there is less lubrication on the floor. So with the snow's gone, that means the friction has increased, which means it's really hard to push across. So have a think now and maybe write down some ideas about what else can be used as lubricant to help you push or pull along a frictional surface. So here's what it would have looked like. Here we have a big pyramid stone that they're wanting to get across into the Valley of the Kings, and it is being on a sleigh, and we've got men pulling the sleigh. Here we only have 6 men, whereas on the last image it was a lot more men because less force is needed because the man is carrying the water jug, which is lubricating and wetting the sand, making it easier for them to slide the sledge across, therefore lessening the friction. So here is your task. What I want you to do is freeze the page here, write out this small paragraph, filling in the missing words from the word bank. This is task number 1. Task number 2 is to copy my diagram, yours would be much better, and labelling it how the Egyptians pulled the sandstone across the sand using water as a lubricant. So here is some keywords at the bottom that you can label your image. This is task 2. And task 3 is your own extension. So maybe doing your own experiment at home. The first thing you will need is an object that will move across a surface such as a toy car. And then I want you to think about 4 different surfaces. So when you push that object across, when you push the toy car across a surface, I want you to think if that surface will have lots of friction or it will have less friction. So for example, you could use a carpet, you could use a table, you could use a bed sheet, and you could use a kitchen surface. You could then decrease the friction by adding a lubricant. So that could be adding some water, adding some fairy liquid, which will make it slimy, and then that'll lessen the friction. So I want you to just have your own little experiment and your play, and you can see if you've got any surfaces in your house that have less friction and any surface in your house that have lots of friction. Now you could write it down in a table and have a think about maybe why a surface has more friction, or what lubricant has then decreased the friction on your surface. So this is a nice little fun experiment that you don't need many resources at all to do at home. Something like a toy car or something that can be pushed along a surface, and then lots of different surfaces in your house. You could definitely do more than 4, and I'd love to see some pictures of you conducting this experiment.